Alright guys, so this is Helsinki. Apparently it's the most happiest place in the world. And we're going to find out a little bit about what makes it so happy. I'm not sure what that is, coming from a country like Singapore. It's one of the most quietest countries, that's for sure, I can tell you. But it's a interesting place nonetheless. So let me tell you some statistics as I walk here. Like I said, number one milk drinking per capita in the world, even though Finns, watch out here, are known to be lactose intolerant. I'm not sure why that is, but a lot of milk gets consumed here. Oh, cool. This is the international school of Helsinki, which is nice. So the international school is where, I guess, it sort of exhibits really that this is more an international city than it is a local city. But what I was saying was that, you know, milk consumption in a lactose intolerant city, I mean, okay. Then you got number two, you got coffee drinking per capita. So who'd have thought? Maybe that's a European statistic, I'm not sure. Maybe you guys can let me know in the comments below what that means. But what I saw from some research is, yeah, a lot of coffee consumption. Can't imagine it's the biggest in the world. It can't be, right? Who knows? Anyway, I'm very new here. So, apart from coffee, third one actually is heavy metal music. Now, I've been a heavy metal music fan myself, so tomorrow I actually go and experience what that means. And, you know, from a country like Singapore, which is, you know, you can't, it's banned basically. You can't really sort of go to heavy metal music sort of clubs. So that's going to be an experience and meet some really interesting people and what they have to say. But, you know, we'll see. Let me share more with you as I continue this trek towards the rest of my journey. So, this is pretty interesting. I mean, this is 10:20 in the morning in Helsinki. I'm just saying, it's like there's maybe a car or two, like maybe, you know, sort of wandering around, and I'm like, okay, this is apparently downtown. So it's pretty good to see that if there's this kind of capacity, if I can say, for business, you know, for access, for people who want to open up shop here. I'm just saying that this is the kind of place that we want to see, you know. Slightly underwhelming, but at the same time means that there's more opportunities. Not enough people have really come here and occupied this place as much, and I think it's good, you know. I think it's a good way for us to explore out of the whole of Europe, the saturated, you know, France, Germany, Switzerland, it's totally saturated, but here you've got Finland and Helsinki partners looking to say, guys, look at Finland, we're here, we're willing to give you guys an opportunity to come here, set up shop, do something special, and I'm all for it, you know. Why not? Singapore 30 years, 40 years ago, still struggling, you know. You look at Singapore today, it took open policies It took open government. It took forward-thinking policies to say, build private sector. And we're losing that. We're losing the ability for us to have more private sector encouragement to come into countries and continents that are maybe hitherto before not really thought as that. I think if this is downtown, let's say Orchard Road or CBD, Maxwell Road, right? All for it. Imagine if you could get into Singapore 40 years ago and you could get into the opportunities of business, research, manufacturing that has so much capacity, and the government's willing to sort of make you move forward. Why not? Here I am at Maria 01. So after a 30-minute trek, I seem to have reached where I'm supposed to. Now it's quite interesting. This will remind you of Dempsey Road. If anyone has been around in Singapore, a pre-war kind of a place that has become, I guess, well, part of the economy. And so here's your Dempsey Road of Helsinki. And I hope to learn more as I get to venture around. But this is where all of the startups and all of the interesting stuff seems to happen. So we'll find out more. So this has been really interesting. I've been getting to know a bit more about what Helsinki is about and the way that the whole Maria operations actually works. It's actually very different from what I thought it would be. I'm actually here with the wonderful people over at Helsinki Partners, and they're going to show me about what it's like for the first experience on understanding Helsinki, the area, the opportunities, and we'll learn more from the team here. So here we go.
All right, so hello everyone, and so this is Juha Paakkala and Taru Virtanen from Health Capital Helsinki. We are collaborating with Helsinki Partners here. And welcome to Maria 01. So this is the Helsinki main startup hub. This has been now startup hub for about 5 years, and this was a former City of Helsinki hospital. So this was actually one of the largest hospitals in Finland, and there was the most busy ER was downstairs. But currently this is a startup hub, and you can actually note that even with the current premises, so you see the hospital beds and elevators are just like from the past. And this is going to be a big development area, so Helsinki is having big plans to develop this as one of the largest startup hubs in Europe. And so that is going to happen in the future years. So now we will show Rohit around, and he will tell you more about this.
Sounds awesome. Sounds just like Dempsey in a way for Singaporeans here, but Dempsey is nowhere near the size and scale of what you're seeing here. This is a whole other level. So when
and
you
it's
look
going to
at,
be bigger.
and it's going to be bigger.
Yeah.
So
right
when you
now
look at,
around 100 startups are based here, I think.
wow.
Yeah.
So when you look at Singapore, Singapore thinks of converting all its pre-war colonial infrastructure into gentrified restaurants and eating. But what Finland is doing, what Helsinki is doing, I think, is to try and make it more attuned towards new businesses and new startups. And I think this is what is absolutely awesome. So looking forward to learning more.
Got it. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, Land of Extremes, fascinating place, and started to get deeper into sort of private sector, finance, emerging market, doing a lot of. I mean, Mongolia was sitting on a lot of gold and copper and coal and big mining countries. So there was mining related investments, but other stuff that was interesting too. So we were there for a couple of years. Then started to sort of think more entrepreneurially. Started a company in Haiti, doing energy sort of.
So this is what you call frontier finance.
Well, Mongolia, I tend to talk about emerging market finance.
Right.
Whereas Mongolia was definitely like Wild West when I got there, so I'm a frontier market. But yeah, I guess in the case of Haiti, it was more just similarly serendipitous moment with a former classmate that wanted to do this thing in Haiti, and I was thinking about the same problem, and we were like, yeah, let's try it. And then we managed to get some money, and we're trying to build a company around sort of electrifying rural communities using biomass and other renewable energy. And it was more of a labor of love than many other things. I mean, the intention was to be for profit.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a lot of profits to be had.
And this is independent, like you're doing something independently of your own, or was this part of like
Yeah, no, we started the company, 3 or 4 people. I eventually grew a bit more and got some media attention and like National Public Radio and Inc. magazine maybe or something. Yeah. But it was more because it was just a fascinating concept, and I think we were pushing limits of the possible. I think Haiti's a terrible place to try to do business. I mean, I'm glad it's a great place to learn, but like it's a really difficult place to try to run a company for any number of reasons. I think, and it seems like things have deteriorated a bit in the last few years as well with the political situation. But it's just been pretty unstable, and there's a lot of the economy is the economics of business there are really out of balance because of all the aid money flowing in that sort of inflates other salaries and drives again incentives in weird directions. So it was tough. It was a tough market to work in, and a tough problem to be solving. There's some really great companies doing stuff in that space that are trudging along and continue there. But we ultimately sort of stepped back after a few years on that venture. And I was in the meanwhile working on something else, much sort of more grandiose around natural disaster risk insurance for same market. So basically the South, the global South, essentially. Yeah. And so, the idea was to, with the climate change and sort of the increased risk exposure that many of these countries face, there's a limited ability to hedge against weather and earthquake risk, essentially. Okay. And so building sort of a global, essentially it's a reinsurance vehicle targeting these markets, hedging, say, Peruvian drought against Indonesian, earthquakes. And so for working with, our clients the company still exists, governments and sort of like microfinance banks or corporates or NGOs that have different kinds of exposure to, this isn't like household level, this is, corporate level, business level, and government level exposures to disruptions from these events, and so giving them an instrument to hedge that. So
when it comes to insurance, it's almost like you're finding ways to defend for the next, let's say, disaster situation that might arise, and that there is an ability for there to be sponsored funding that could actually support the rebuilding of. Yeah, I mean
it's like thinking about just resilience, business interruption, protection. So, the losses that, any company, Nike got hit by floods in Thailand or something. And they probably have a property, protection that pays them back for loss of property. But there's lots of other revenue disruptions. Their employees are out of work, for some period of time, and getting a quick injection of cash. So part of the whole model was using sort of third party, like our own indicator, like weather indicators. So it's like if the water levels rise this high, or if the wind blows this fast, or if the ground shakes this much, then you get X percentage of your policy, basically.
So that's not a predictive model. So you're not predicting what might happen. It's not a data-driven sort
It's
of
heavily data-driven
It is
because we have to price it.
right.
But ultimately, it's a model to say this is what happened, and based on that model, you get, $5 million or you get $2 million of your policy,
Right.
paid out, and you're paying a premium on that just like any other policy.
Right.
And so it's a very efficient way to get emergency money, or just usually these things get, traditional insurance can take a lot longer to pay out.
Yeah.
So it's called parametric insurance, and so the company was called Global Parametrics because it was a global parametric vehicle, and so we had our own capital. No, not a huge amount of capital, but in this space, but about 100 million, and we're sort of building a portfolio of that across multiple markets and providing.
So in the world of healthcare, it's really funny because insurance providers are considered almost like the casino, and you can never bet against the casino. So insurance providers, at least in Asia, always say, yeah, when it comes to certain conditions or therapies, rare diseases, oncology, that sort of stuff, chronic diseases, we'll cover this but not that. We'll cover that but not this. And so they typically will follow, let's say, certain medical association guidelines that they will actually help in a way guide. And so you come up with government policies that say, right, you've got breast cancer. Did you detect it early? No. You detected it late. That's your fault. So you're going to get this, that, and that. You're not going to get the rest of it. And so for a longest time, particularly in countries like Japan, the term financial toxicity is coming up more and more. And so there's this question about what's the role of insurance providers in this whole scheme of things, because people are actually foregoing care. They'd rather say, yeah, you know what, aunt so-and-so might as well just, kick the bucket because it's too expensive to take care of her. Literally taking these sort of choices. So when you think about it from a country level, there's no choice. I mean, that you're sitting on a certain fractures point of the planet. Chances are you're going to hit, another earthquake or something like that, like in Indonesia in particular. What do? Do you spend money on the probability versus actually, no, this is something I'll just assume will never happen. So
or just wait for aid to come and
right, and then but aid doesn't come for free. It comes with all sorts of other little things, and that's what in a way drives the situation of debt, particularly coming out of the pandemic. And healthcare, unfortunately, is always the one that gets knocked the furthest. So I remember stories within, let's say, perhaps in areas you were in. So when you're talking about rebuilding certain communities, there are babies being born. There are still diabetics. There are still folks who are on dialysis care, and that's been disrupted. So the parametric concept, does that sort of factor in some of this aspect, or is it more like a carte blanche?
It's a really flexible kind of product. I mean, I think there's been a lot of work by some doing it at a micro level, sort of more of a household individual level. That's challenging because you need a really high resolution product, and you also need a very well informed client that understands what they're buying, because it's a very sophisticated instrument.
I'm sure.
And so.
Is it software or is it a?
No, it's not. It's more. There's a lot of intricacy. It's a financial hedge. So we're writing derivatives, as based on the weather derivatives essentially, and so that's what the common sort of farmer isn't. Not that they can't understand it, but there's a lot of sort of special sort of things on the margins that may not be clear, and exactly where's the data coming from, like how is this settled, things like that. But all that being said, like it's a very flexible instrument. You can, it's kind of like if you're buying a life insurance policy, you can buy $100 million life insurance if you want it, right?
Or you can buy the bare bones stuff.
And so you have, to some degree, like there's certain regulations in place that you can't insure, more than you actually have. But effectively, like there's a lot you can do with these products to cover a whole range of disruptions that might occur to your business or to your community. Or, there's a product that in Mexico that was a hurricane product that we supported that was protecting the reef. So it was a tourism community on the water, and they needed a product that would help them get funds immediately after a hurricane, so they can restore and protect the reef. So it was protecting the rate. Another one in Philippines was actually a forecast that allowed money to trigger before the landfall, so that people could get out of harm's way or build, put out any sort of supports in place to protect themselves against an event. So that's the kind of things you can do with these kind of parametric instruments, I guess, if structured efficiently. But they don't work too. Like if you don't, models aren't perfect, right? And so there is that kind of risk, which is the dig. One of the digs against these kind of products is like, you're not going to get this precise right number as if you had gone through these communities and like actually ex post after the event assessed the damage. Like it can't be that perfect, but you can model it.
You can minimize it.
Yeah, you can manage it. And then the idea is, use these two products together. Like parametric isn't the only solution; it's a complementary solution to other kinds of insurance.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Very few people know this term. I'll be honest.
It's true. I didn't know about it until I started the company. I'm the guy that it was a connection from Mongolia, actually, another American guy that we found each other through mutual work in Mongolia, and he's been deep in this space for quite some time and was looking to had gotten some initial sort of support to conceptualize a business, and was looking for basically someone to help him do that. And one of the guys I knew in Mongolia had been helping him, but he's like, this is getting to a point where I think you're a better fit. And so like basically the two of us, I came with more of the like raising capital, building a business model, and he was like the industry expert on insurance and parametric design. And so ultimately, we launched it together and brought in a team, and it was backed by the British government and the German government. And
so you got the whole sort of backing from.
It was more like sort of somewhat traditional sort of aid entities, but playing in a more commercial space. So there was a lot of complexity there. And then a sort of more semi-commercial investor came in as well to support the entity, and then ultimately brought in Hannover Re as they shared in the policy, so they were sort of doubling our capital base. So they would participate in most deals.
So do you find that capital is one of the most important aspects if you're trying to create this sort of almost for-profit, for-good combination? So you're doing for good in the sense you're trying to inform and advise governments or situations that might arise on a much more massive scale. But end of the day, traditional aid always is a little bit behind the eight ball. But your concept is put something that actually has privatized money behind it. And that works as a combination because it tries to find solutions rather than.
I mean, it's sort of this middle zone of my career. So I ultimately got burned out of selling insurance and moved to a new company, Nithio, which has some similarities to my previous company, but is focused on energy access in Africa. So it has an investment vehicle, but also has a sort of heavy tech side to it, which my company did as well, because we were building weather models and stuff. And so this company is essentially investing in distributors of household energy products, but there's also a technology aspect to how we're understanding the underlying credit risk of the downstream investments. I can explain it more, but
please. I mean, go into this because healthcare is considered highly complex.
Yeah.
But then speaking with other Finns and other sort of program, people there, each comes with this really unique aspect that makes them why they're here, and that's actually kind of like the agenda here. So with all this storyline, what brings you here? But explain a bit of that. So you're talking about developing certain aspects or algorithms perhaps or other mechanisms
so
in the African continent?
Well, I think let me get to it in just a second, because I wanted to answer your first question about capital and like the different kinds of capital, and I think that's where I've played for like the last 15-20 years is in around that question, I think, and thinking of and ultimately if you're able to work with purely like traditional institutional commercial capital, I find that to be the easiest. In some ways, the most sort of depend. I mean, there's all sorts of there's a spectrum, right, of capital, from purely grant capital to impact, social impact capital that's looking for some sort of patient return, perhaps, and then up to like purely commercial that their only concern is like how many multiples of my capital are you going to return to me in 5 years, right? And I think there's simplicity to this side of it, where it's like,
Fascinating.
and there's also, but I think I tend to play in the middle, because I think the problems I'm trying to solve tend to require that kind of capital. I mean, the ambition is generally to move whatever solution you're providing from starting here to over here to this more commercial aspect. And I think we ultimately did that with my previous company, because we started with, development agency capital and then brought in Hanover Re, and they were working on completely commercial terms in their sort of support for the
But depending on where your funding is coming from,
Yep.
you then get steered to that area. So if it's public funded or
Yep.
development money, it's
Yep.
almost like you got very strict KPIs, now stick to that. Don't go off.
Yeah.
If it's privatized, almost VC like,
Yep.
show us the results, then
Yep.
you're sort of driven there.
Yep.
So it's you're living in the middle,
Yeah.
but that's not an easy place to
No,
be.
well, I think if you stay in the middle, but I think a lot of the aspirations in the middle are to at least bring in some of the folks in this that are aligned, sort of ultimately aligned in their overall mission to what's happening here, and I think sort of maybe coming back to Finland and sort of Europe more broadly, I hear most companies talking about their business, talking about the problem here in particular, in a way that generally aligns with how I've thought about my companies that work in this sort of middle space of sustainability, impact. There's a bigger problem. I mean, most companies, any tech company will talk about we're trying to solve big problems. It's not about the money, etc. But yes, like I think their investors drive them to so many multiples of return on their capital. My sense is, without in the little time I've been here, there's a mentality shift a bit here that seems a bit more aligned with somewhere in this middle zone. It's not but ultimately you're right. I mean, the type of capital that when we took capital from the British government and the German government, like you have a lot of other constraints on your business and a lot of KPIs that you have to think about that are non-traditional.
Yeah.
You have things about like lots of concerns as to what's going to come up in the Daily Mail in the UK as to like what did you do as a government investing in this company that's doing XYZ, and that's not. I mean, these are things that any company should be worried about, perhaps, but in our sense, they became sort of front and center, and so that does slow down your ability to grow. It makes it makes it harder to do certain things. So I think best case scenario is finding really well aligned investors. You set up your company with your own vision as to what you're trying to achieve from an impact and sort of profit perspective, and I think finding investors that are sort of well aligned with that, or sort of steering them to be as well aligned with that as possible. And then the more you grow and the more you establish yourself as a presence in the market, more you can sort of set the tone of those conversations and really sort of say these are the standards of impact we're trying to achieve. And this is how much we're trying to achieve profitability wise. And
so let me ask you a question that when you talk about impact factors and whatnot, there's an ever-changing landscape, at least in the region that I come from.
Sure.
So out in Southeast Asia, Singapore, people are being asked to choose a side. It's really weird. So you choose a side.
Yep.
Never have we seen Canada, of all the countries, suddenly say we're here, and the monies that are coming in to sort of almost be a counterweight or a counterpoint to other, I guess, geopolitical aspects. Now, that influences a lot of the KPIs, that influences a lot of the metrics, that influences almost the very cause that you walk in with. So, for instance, if you kind of, in all transparency, talk about a certain type of initiative or a program that's running into, millions of dollars, but the funding comes from so-and-so, there is an adverse impact that's coming up here. So I come from that sort of a zone, which has changed dramatically in the last 3 or 4 years, particularly before COVID and after pandemic. It's a whole different world. What's your experience been? I mean, you've been in all places of Mongolia through to Haiti and beyond. Now you're here in Finland. What's your impact? I mean, do you feel sometimes public money sort of comes with certain strings attached to that, or do you think that this is all right, we still get our work done?
Oh yeah, I mean, lots of challenges with taking purely public money. I think it was really bold of and like the British government in particular, from where they stood to step up and fund the company, based on, because it was very different than things that they had traditionally done, and they were clearly sort of pushing limits of what they would normally do, and but yeah, it when it comes to raising new capital and sort of talking to the more conventional investors, you know, it was this big sort of unknown as to how will this entity behave, and how, you know, how am I going to partner with, you know, the British government, you know, in as a shareholder in this company, and what's that going to do? So yeah, I think it created a lot of challenges for us that, you know, are understandable, but you know, you know, I think it helped me learn like a lot about stakeholder management, and kind of understanding kind of the different, how things play out with different kinds of stakeholders that are trying to drive a business. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm not sure how I would do it again if I were to have that choice. Honestly, the state of the concept was in such an early stage that I'm not sure what the alternative path was at the moment. So if we really wanted to do this, and then I think, as is the intent, like these kind of entities step up into places where there's a high level of uncertainty and risk, and like commercial investors wouldn't have been there otherwise, and so they were stepping up to fill this gap in the market and help us do that. So, but yeah, it's a fraught process, I think, to take a business with sort of a fundamentally impact driven ethos into a commercial.
I found that to be a common thread speaking to other Finns. Like there's this almost we've got a common sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. You said enough time about this whole idea that, you know, we have to have impact in terms of what we're doing. Yeah. Now, the work that we're doing at Sovereign or Voice is probably a bit like, how do we create impact but not repeat the errors of the old, but create something new? So you're forced to forage into areas that haven't been before, and you're therefore trying to sort of raise funds with traditional investors who are like, hey, hang on, why are you going off in that direction? It's all here. And you're like, no, hang on, it's actually there. Because you have a purpose, you have integrity, you've got, you know, if you go down there, you're going to go back again to the same old. You're trying to sort of create something different. And that's what I found about at least the idea behind what Finland's trying to express for itself, which is, you know, this eternal search for identity, right? I mean, it goes back decades, you know, generations. Yeah. And that's what makes Finland, in that respect, so unique. When you just literally go a few hundred kilometers to the north or the west or whatever, you find a whole different expression. But what is Nitio, or what is your next sort of, I guess, challenge in front of you, find for itself within the Finnish context? And I guess the question more is, so why Finland? You've got all these other opportunities sitting in front of you that could possibly be easier. Yeah, I mean, similarly, it was a bit opportunistic, I would say. Like, I've just finished an executive MBA in May. Oh, really? Okay. And sort of my wife, we have kids 7 and 5, and since throughout their existence, one of us has been in school and also trying to do a job of some kind, and so it's just been a hectic 7 years, and so there was this light at the end of the tunnel in May that we were like, life can begin again a little bit, and so honestly, like, we were very, very much in the mindset of like, let's get out and like sort of get back in the world again, because we've been very domestic in the US for this period of like going to school and sort of starting a family, and so I think we were in this very open mindset, and I had a friend who was in the first cohort, or two friends that were in the first cohort, that just spoke so highly of Finland. So it wasn't even on my map until they brought it to my attention, and so I think what really appealed, so first personally, was you know, the sort of sustainable orientation of the whole community as I understood it from some of the anecdotes that were provided to me and stuff, to the work-life balance, which is something that really felt like I could benefit from a little bit more, sort of
direct thought around like balancing life with work. 3, education system, like really curious about how, the U.S. in many has good like higher level like education, but in the sort of early years and high school, it's hit or miss really. And so really just curious to see one of the world class sort of public education systems firsthand for our children. We have the aspiration, expectation to not live in the U.S.
Sure.
in the future, and especially during our kids' development. So it's just tasting what it feels like to see all these aspects in one place. And so I think that was personally like why it was an easy sell for us talking about the opportunity. Professionally, from Nithyo's perspective, I think we're a global company in many ways. I mean, we have teams in various parts of Africa. We're essentially headquartered in Washington D.C., which is where I'm from, but right now, have different members in Europe, and so really easy for me to move from one place to the next, and then sort of keep things moving, as long as I'm not going to Singapore. I think, although we do have one team member living in Singapore right now. Right. But so being here is pretty easy, and I think we were just in the process of closing one of our first investors from the region, and in sort of the Nordic region, and felt like there was a pretty sort of aligned orientation around sort of the energy access problem and sustainability, climate issues, so could likely find more aligned investors here. So it's a bit of, I'm the CFO of the company, so sort of thinking about capital is what I do. And so I think part of it's, getting more tapped into the capital markets and the investor base here. Another angle is there is a core sort of AI tech component to our business. And so just exploring that sort of connections here, particularly, I'm learning more about the talent base here, given Nokia's history and then the growth of sort of what seems like a pretty strong and not terribly expensive tech sort of human capital base here. So could be like, depending on how things grow with our company, if as we're growing that side of the business, it could be a justifiably place to build up some of the team. Who knows? And so just to kind of exploring those two angles, capital and human capital and financial capital.
But if you looked across literally over into, let's say, Switzerland or Germany, France, even our neighbors over in Sweden, it seems to be the sort of place to sort of default to. I mean, there seems to be just a more ready-made infrastructure access. I mean, is it that Finland now is in particular looking to drive more innovation by bringing in folks like yourself, me, other folks here in the Fin program, that brings the innovation standards, bring a bit more of that hunger attitude? But do you think that it almost is trying to break into another level or a system? I'm trying to understand why is Finland particularly now looking at widening its aspect from technology through healthcare, through social media, through other aspects. Is this a growth strategy, you think, or what's sort of driving this?
Yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, the little I've understood, it's kind of long-term survival. I mean, I think I find with a lot of the infrastructure, and as far as I've been interpreting their sort of view on sustainability and climate, like it's much more forward-thinking, and I mean, I think that I'm used to experiencing, and similar, and maybe it's because they have the resources and the time and less people to sort of worry about that. You can have take that perspective. I'm not sure, but I really appreciate that approach to governance and planning and such, and so my take has been like, they've got to find population to replace the missing sort of the numbers and keep the economy growing, and so they can sustain the lifestyle they're looking for. I mean, in my sense is they don't want tons of people moving here, but they want to keep things growing at with the human capital coming in from out abroad. So yeah, it seems like a pretty direct strategy to rejuvenate or grow new parts of the economy and bring new people in.
And that's why there's such a remarkable sort of overlap with Singapore and Finland, I'll be honest. I mean, there's this, just about, I don't know, very few people know this, but like, I think last month it was Singapore and Finland's 50 years of sort of diplomatic relationships. And it was it was a big event. And, you know, for everyone who's sort of been part of that, it's a proud moment that you got two young countries sort of emerging from the shadows of, you know, sort of their own backgrounds, their own sort of heritage, and identifying their own identity in that respect. And what does it mean to be Singaporean today, and what does it mean to be Finnish today? And the reality is that you're not just this one homogenous identity. You've got to bring sort of, to use that term, economic migration that will actually create impetus. Now, let me ask you a question. When it comes to recessionary aspects, so we're going through a recession, at least in Singapore. It's not overtly expressed. And I think most governments will obviously want to say, no, it's okay. Things are a little tough right now, it'll come later. But when it comes to access and to innovation and brave new ideas, it's becoming challenging. And do you think that that's something that you're, in the last period of time that you've been here, do you find that there's a bit more of conservative outlook in terms of where and what to spend money's on, or do you find investment standards are, let's go into that new frontier kind of concept?
I don't know if I have a ton of data, very anecdotal to sort of weigh in on that point, but I think from a sort of venture space, in the angel space, it does, you know, for many obvious reasons as far as scale and sort of size of the market, but the valuations and the amount of capital, sort of the ticket sizes are certainly much smaller than what you would see in the U.S., which is not unexpected, I think. But there seems to be a very different kind of mood around valuation companies and stuff. I talked to some people sort of that own real estate, and suggest that with rates moving as they are, that there's significant. I don't know if you could say deflation, but prices are definitely going in a very negative. But it wasn't clear like how that's. I mean, what's been remarkable. Just I don't have. It's all just sort of anecdotal, but the things like the lack of poor people, at least visible poor people, and also I haven't seen what's a wealthy person as far as is not the scale of difference between the bottom and the top is the traditional Gini coefficient, right, is much more limited here than any place I've spent much time. Nice. Certainly from the U.S. perspective, right? And so I see a society like that as being a lot more resilient to recessionary trends overall. Which
fascinating. Look, time is always like on our against us, right? I mean, it's we've been so the idea was just to have this frank, informal chat, and sort of just get people who generally have never seen or heard or know enough about Finland to understand that look, there's great folks like yourself who are maybe to set roots or establish themselves and at least sort of look at a new frontier. But what would be your, let's say, one or two takeaway points for anyone who's saying Finland? Let me think about Finland. Why? So what would be your, let's say, 1 month? Is it?
Yeah, one month in. Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I really come back to the coming from the U.S. So that's an American, and that has there's certain values that I sort of don't always feel are well aligned with the broader community, and this real emphasis on sustainability, I think, in sort of very long, medium term sort of views on how to grow society. I think I really appreciate that, and I think I also I sort of don't feel the need to be incredibly wealthy. And I so the idea of being in a place where most people are kind of happy enough, is with the resources they have, like, it's very appealing to me. So I think those are sort of certain aspects that I've taken away. I think the one challenge that I'm starting to run against right now is, as I'm trying to make different business trips and plans for popping over here, popping over there. It's not as easy as I'm used to.
You mean the logistics?
Yeah, like if you're in Amsterdam, getting to 3 different meetings in 3 different countries in 3 days is pretty easy. It's not so easy going out of that. I don't know, and I've tried to make a couple travel plans and then a couple business trips, and it's just not as simple and quick. And it may just be, the places I'm going at a time I'm trying to go, but it just being on mainland, Europe, Western Europe I've found to be just a bit easier and quicker and cheaper.
It's funny because coming from Asia, Finnair is one of the most consistent presence that I remember. I remember being in Shanghai, and it would always be a daily flight out of China, whether that flight had 2 people or 100. And even, I think yesterday when I was on that flight, the day before, I forget now, but it was Finnair, and I'm like, wow, this flight's packed. And I'm sitting next to people and I'm listening to the accents, and I'm like, they're all Australians, and they're all like from China, and they're all from so-and-so. So you realize that Singapore and Finland, again, have this interesting concept that you're drawing crowds into your cities, but not necessarily into your country. You're just building it as an avenue towards moving further. And I was at the immigration point, and I finally reached at the end, and I was at the baggage claim, and I was the only guy with like 10 suitcases. Everyone else for that entire flight and more than that were off to somewhere else. And so you're like, well, the airport system's got its act together. It's drawing the crowds, but it's not bringing people to say, I'll stay here for like another 4 or 5 days and see what's going on. No, I want to go on to somewhere else. So, I guess
it's just been hard to find direct flights that are that inexpensive and timing that I just kind of I've traveled business a fair amount in Europe, and it's get on, you find it hasn't been as easy as from my perspective.
That's a good.
So like just thinking about that's been the one thing I've been like trying to envision, like in the world where let's say I moved here, like is that a problem, or how big of a problem is that?
Dan, it's been an hour and a half almost, and
is it really?
Something like, I don't know, it feels like I think we started at 10 or something.
I was thinking that these clocks are never that consistent.
Oh no! Wait a minute! Maybe I look at the wrong clock.
So fortunately, it's 11, which is kind of.
Oh man! I know. Look, everyone's got schedules. You've got things that are going on, and I mean, it's just been such an experience. But glad to be part of this 90-day Fin program, seeing what's going on, and sort of want to learn more about what's going on with Nityo and other parts of your business.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, thanks for taking the time.
Oh, thanks.
I mean, you're leaving tomorrow?
Unfortunately, I'm just literally here. So I sort of timed it back to back. So I'm going to be in Geneva, preparations for UNGA.
Yeah.
Then there's an amazing MIT Solve judging jury that I'm a part of, which is about rare diseases and sustainability. So that's in New York, and all part of that sort of sequence of events that leads up to the UNGA. So we've got 5 finalists. Anyone who's sort of listening is like, these finalists are amazing. They're doing everything from, seaweed-based, renewable plastics through
I've heard about that.
Predictable sort of data, which is why I was asking about that. And I think each and every one of them needs to win. And then there's some amazing other sort of roundtable sustainability conversations that happen along the way. So. Yeah, and I hope to be back again, maybe sometime in early October.
Nice.
If the evaluations are still on, but the more I'm getting to know Finland and Helsinki, I should say, not Finland, but everyone has this sameness of purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's drawing us together, just as a network. So, awesome.
Interesting.
Great to meet you.
Yeah. Great to get your insights as to
cool.
picking apart.
Good stuff.
So this is Apalea Avenue, and right behind me, up there, is where you've got the main WHO building, you've got ILO, UNA. So this is day 2 here at the Concordia Summit, and we've been speaking to many voices and many experts on what their impressions are and how their time here has been. I'm so thrilled to be here with Anuradha Gupta, the President for Immunization at Sabin Vaccine Institute, and one of the leading voices when it comes not just to vaccination but equity and access for health. And I'm really glad that we get a bit of time to talk with Anuradha. So this is day 3 here at Concordia, and it's been a real experience. These are the realities of what currently Asia, Southeast Asia, again as counterpoint that, has really been looking towards, particularly post-pandemic.